Nolan Teasley is remaking the Vikings front office in his image. Do any of the remaining free agents interest the new guys? Welcome to the Vibe of the Vikings, where we catch the real feel of Minnesota football. We're a part of the Grey Duck Sports Network, and you can find us on social media, on Twitter and on YouTube at Grey Duck Sports, and then on TikTok at grey.duck.sports. On there, you can find clips from this show as well as the two others we have on the Grey Duck Sports Network, which are the Twinkie Town Tavern if you're a Minnesota Twins fan, or if you want a fuller scope of the NFL, we have the NFL Grey Duck Show as well. You can find links to all of those podcasts and more on our YouTube, Twitter, and TikTok pages. Well, it's been 2 weeks since Nolan Teasley has taken over officially as the general manager of your Minnesota Vikings, and he has already begun cleaning house, at least in the front office. He gets rid of a couple of assistant general managers during last week's minicamp when everybody was in town for a mandatory minicamp. So 3 guys were removed out, and he has replaced them with 4. We're going to talk about those 4 and the accolades that they have, and why one of those names, while it might cause some heart palpitation in you when you first hear it, we don't have to be, we're going to talk about why you might not have to be as concerned as you would originally think at face value. We're also going to get an update on the Vikings quarterback battle as we are in the final weeks of OTAs. And then we're going to take a look at the remaining crop of free agents and see if any of them should interest the Vikings with some of the newfound cap space that they have after the post-June 1 releases. But for now, let's talk about the front office hires, and we have to start with the elephant in the room, and that is Ryan Pace. The former general manager of the Chicago Bears, yes, that Ryan Pace, is going to be an advisor to the Minnesota Vikings. He is hired to be in that position. He has those 7 years of experience running the Chicago Bears, where I think a lot of Bears fans would tell you it was a complete and utter disaster. I would say it probably was not as bad as people remember, for one, so it's not something that we have to get all worked up about and start thinking, oh, is this just another Ryan Grigson, who, by the way, is still with the team, but I think he's been moved down to the boiler room somewhere. They haven't really outlined what his role is going to be for Nolan Teasley's front office, but he is still here. I think Ryan Pace at the very least is a better option than Grigson moving forward. And we also have to keep in mind, this is not for any super, official assistant general manager role. This is in an advisor role, maybe some sort of mentorship to Nolan Teasley, a guy that Teasley can go to because of his general manager experience and say, and he can bounce ideas off of a guy who can look back at his tenure already and say, okay, these are the moves that I made that were successful, and these are the mistakes that became pitfalls for me while I was with the Chicago Bears. So that is the sort of advisor role, and you might ask, okay, why should we have confidence that that advice would be worth listening to? One is because I think we're all humans and we all grow and we all learn from our past mistakes. If we don't have an ego that gets in the way, and I have no reason to believe that Ryan Pace would have a huge ego and probably has learned from whatever mistakes it was that caused him to draft guys like Mitch Trubisky and Justin Fields. But also because this was a guy that had some hits while he was with the Chicago Bears. You're typically not going to be with the same organization building the roster for 7 years if you haven't found at least an iota of success. I mean, the Minnesota Vikings made the playoffs in 2 of the 4 seasons under Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, had winning records in 3 of the 4 seasons, and the only season that they didn't have a winning record, it was mostly because the starting quarterback tore his Achilles in the middle of the year. And yet, Kwesi Adofo was fired after 4 seasons. Ryan Pace had nearly double that while leading the Chicago Bears. So at first you have to think, okay, well, maybe there's some stuff that was salvageable from his time leading the Bears front office. And in fact, I think there was. And this is why we don't need to panic when we hear that Ryan Pace is going to be a part of Minnesota's front office. And the biggest thing from his tenure that really changed the scope of what the Chicago Bears could be early on in his tenure was the trade for Khalil Mack. And that was a big blockbuster. It required Chicago to give up a couple of first-round draft picks, as well as some second and third round. It was a lot of draft capital, a big swing from Ryan Pace, but Khalil Mack came into Chicago and immediately was a difference maker. So for Seattle, from Seattle, where Nolan Teasley was from, that was a team that liked to make big swings. And Nolan Teasley, we talked about in our last show, was in the room and hearing the decision-making process, being a part of the decision-making process when it came to the big moves, like moving on from Russell Wilson, like taking big swings on Sam Darnold and Geno Smith, and then moving on from Geno Smith. He has been in the that organization and heard those discussions only from within that organization. And now you're bringing in another guy to bounce ideas off of, to give you another perspective on when is the right time to make these monster moves, because Ryan Pace's track record was, well, the right time for us was in 2018, and immediately it turned us into the best defense in all of football. And obviously Vic Fangio helps, but what's Vic Fangio but a hire of, Matt Nagy, who was hired by Ryan Pace. So I think he can even get some credit there, but Khalil Mack was the engine, or I should say the key to this defensive engine of Vic Fangio that made everything work almost seamlessly. So Ryan Pace can be there for that, and as a talent evaluator, he hasn't been necessarily terrible. I don't think the question with Justin Fields was ever, is he actually a good thrower of the football? Is he a good athlete? But it's the same question you're going to have with all other quarterbacks coming up from the college ranks, is how well can he read defenses? Does he hesitate to pull the trigger or not? And typically in college, when you are the top dog, you have the confidence to always pull that trigger. And there was really not a whole lot of ways of knowing that Justin Fields, with his great arm talent and great athleticism as a tremendous dual threat guy at Ohio State, there was really no way to tell ahead of time until he got to camp that he, at the NFL level, would be slower on the trigger, would be slower getting from progression to progression to progression throughout his reads. So I don't think you can fully blame Ryan Pace for that, but it certainly was a mistake. Mitch Trubisky, obviously a mistake, trading up for him and making him the first quarterback taken in that 2017 NFL draft when Patrick Mahomes would be available later on in that same draft. Certainly not the best idea from Ryan Pace. So he has those misses, but he also has what I found was a lot of interesting day 2 and day 3 finds. And guys like Jalen Johnson, who is still a part of that secondary, is an excellent cornerback for them when he is healthy. Roquan Smith, who is one of the best linebackers in the game to this day, got his career started in Chicago as a member of the Chicago Bears. Leonard Floyd and Jordan Howard, who is a great running back for a couple of years. David Montgomery, who was a great running back for a couple of years and still is going to be a starter in the Houston Texans backfield. Cole Kmet, Darnell Mooney, all of these guys, Tevin Jenkins, all of them are guys that were found by the Ryan Pace front office in day 2 or day 3 of the draft during his tenure. So it is not as if we are dealing with some disaster class drafter in Ryan Pace, and it's not even as if he was a disaster class drafter, it's not as if his voice would be the one making those final decisions anyway. Again, it is that advisory role. It is the same role that that Dom Capers might have had with Mike Zimmer at the end of their tenure. The same role that Mike Pettin had with Kevin O'Connell early on in his tenure before leaving. You are bringing in these guys who have been there, that have the experience to be there as an extra person to bounce ideas off of, and can also tell you, with their experience from the position, what the pitfalls are of being a general manager and what can make you successful. So I like the Ryan Pace signing, if not only just for the experience. And now there were 3 other guys who I think are probably going to go a lot more under the radar than Ryan Pace, because he's certainly the headliner of the 4 guys that Teasley hired in this new look front office of the Minnesota Vikings. And one of them is Azam Kapadia. And apologies if I am mispronouncing that, but he is, or was, I should say, a scout with the Seattle Seahawks and had kind of worked his way up in that department and had been one of their better evaluators. And we're already seeing the Seattle Seahawks kind of being remiss that they're losing some of this talent in their front office to Nolan Teasley and the Minnesota Vikings. So assumedly, Azam Kapadia is a part of their sadness. Losing him is a part of their sadness. And having him come over, and he'll lead, I believe, our professional scouting sphere, should give us some good organization. These are scouts, a lot of the scouts that Minnesota has had have been in the organization even preceding the Rick Spielman era. Some of these guys have been there since Robbie B was there in 1999. So we have a lot of the same scouts that made mistakes during the Spielman era, that made mistakes during the Kwesi Adofo-Mensah era. And now you're getting in, at least from the professional side, a new scouting president of scouting operations on the professional side in Azam Kapadia, who had success helping the Seahawks find guys both on the pro level and from the college level to form ultimately what ended up being a Super Bowl winning roster. And then you also get a guy named Andrew Healy, and he comes from Cleveland, where he was the analytics guy of the Cleveland Browns, where he helped, as his title said, I believe it was something along the lines of integrate data and analytics into the evaluation process. And that was something that Nolan Teasley in his introductory press conference said, that the pillars of his regime in Minnesota is going to be built on great scout evaluations, but also a deep commitment to advanced data. And he was a part of the technological analytical overhaul, Andrew Healy was, with the Cleveland Browns, and was a vital part of that decision-making tree, and will be a vital part of that decision-making tree. And you might say, okay, well, the Cleveland Browns don't necessarily have the best track record at the decision-making tree, and I would say certainly you are correct there. Deshaun Watson, the trade for that is probably worse than the Herschel Walker trade that the Minnesota Vikings made back in the day. And some of you may argue that no, the Herschel Walker trade was worse, but I think the Deshaun Watson trade is, straight up the worst trade of all time. But I think that's also more, I think it's become more and more clear that was something that was pushed specifically from ownership. And I think whatever Andrew Healy had to say about going after that guy in the evaluation process, whether positive or negative, wouldn't have been taken much into consideration by the Browns before they decided to make that move. So I'm not going to put a lot of blame there on Andrew Healy, but he is going to be the analytical edge. We've got the scout, we've got the experience, we've got the analytic edge coming in. So you have this new well-rounded staff that is getting a bunch of different perspectives and reporting those perspectives to the new decision maker in Nolan Teasley. So for me, that is an excellent start of a foundation for what this Vikings front office can look like. You're not just getting a bunch of old scouts like in the Moneyball scene talking to Billy Beane and saying, no, it's got to be this certain old school way that we've done it, and it can never be anything else if you're looking for a successful player. It's not going to be that. You're going to have, guys that have broken down technique, that have broken down athleticism of college and NFL players, but it's not going to be just that. It's also not going to be just the room full of Billy Beanes or whoever Jonah Hill's character was in that. I believe it was a fictional fill-in for Paul DePodesta, who they didn't have the rights to, who, by the way, was with the Browns. up until recently, and so Andrew Healy learned under him, but it's not going to be a room full of those guys either. You're going to have these probably discussions where guys from different perspectives are butting heads, and as long as those conversations are being had, these in a very healthy manner, even if they get a little bit fiery, and even if they get a little bit contentious, and arguments ensue because of it, I think if those are healthy discussions, that is going to give Nolan Teasley a lot of the information that he needs in order to make a successful pick in the draft or in free agency or when a trade comes across his table. And then they also bring in Trent Kircher, who on his Seahawks, who was with the Seahawks, again, with Nolan Teasley, but on his Seahawks bio page, it had said essentially that he played a pivotal role in a lot of the both pro and college scouting decisions that the Seattle Seahawks had made over the past few years. So there you have it, unless he is the one writing that bio, which very well could be the case, but the official Seahawks website gave Trent Kirchner a lot of credit for some of the latest successes that the Seahawks have had. So bringing in that guy ties this whole room together. It gives Nolan Teasley guys that he can trust, offers those different perspectives. It's a well-rounded room, and I think it is something to be excited about as we move forward into this new era of Minnesota Vikings football. Now, you also have to consider that Rob Brzezinski and Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores also are going to have significant input in this decision-making process for the Vikings under Nolan Teasley. So maybe that can be an instance where there's a little bit more contention that is a little bit more unhealthy. If you think, okay, well, if Teasley gets all of the information from these guys and Kevin O'Connell just wants a different player and wants to throw all that information out the window, then, we're back to the uncollaborative environment that got us into this mess with Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman and didn't actually improve all that much with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, Brian Flores, and Kevin O'Connell. They had their ups, but they certainly had their downs from a personal side of things. But that is the new front office facelift for your Minnesota Vikings. Let us know what you think. Are you scared of Ryan Pace? Do you think that this well-rounded sort of bringing in guys from different areas to lead your front office is going to be something that allows for more collaboration, or is just another train bound for disaster? Moving on, OTAs are wrapping up this week, and that means the Minnesota Vikings quarterback battle is going to be on a hiatus, at least our public viewing of it. I'm sure both Kyler Murray and J.J. McCarthy are going to get their work in during the offseason up until training camp, but that's not going to be stuff that we are going to be privy to, or even necessarily that the Vikings will be privy to and seeing. But we're about to close the door on any videos of Murray and McCarthy's mechanics until training camp rolls around in late July, early August. So where are we right now in that debate? Because last time we talked, we mentioned the comments that J.J. McCarthy made that were kind of a bit immature and kind of him kind of coming off as ingenuine and showing that perhaps this quarterback competition actually bothered him a little bit more. Meanwhile, we saw Kyler Murray with the PR-trained neutral type response where, yeah, I'm going to take this kid under my wing, yada, yada, yada. Last week, we saw, okay, Kyler Murray is a little bit more frustrated that he isn't getting the amount of first-team reps that he feels he needs to be best prepared for the regular season to fully integrate within this new offense. And then J.J. McCarthy coming off with the more mature comments and saying, in the face of rumors of a trade, not even rumors of a trade, but fantasies that people are producing of a J.J. McCarthy trade, people asked McCarthy about that, and he said that this is where he had always wanted to be pre-draft process. This is where he wanted to be, and he doesn't regret any step of this journey so far. And so that comes off as the more mature answer there. But we're not going for a PR-trained quarterback for either of these guys. We want to see what they can do on the field. And again, not a whole lot to go off of outside of whatever social media videos that the Vikings social media team allows you to see. But what we do know is that this competition is still going on. And this is not a cut and dry competition, a cut and dry fake competition heavily weighted towards one player more than the other that I think a lot of national media folks thought this was going to be. I think if it was going to be as cut and dry, you would have, by the end of OTAs this week, a declaration that yes, indeed, Kyler Murray is going to be your starting quarterback for the 2026 season, which shows me at the very least that there have been some strides, in the eyes of Kevin O'Connell at least, that J.J. McCarthy has made. And again, we have broken down some of the limited video that we had, and it has been, there has been times where that leg doesn't fly open and where the hip is in good rhythm with the arm coming behind it. There are times when that is not on the same page and you have the same issues with the arm coming forward. But none of that really matters until you get into an environment like training camp or like joint practices against the Ravens, where you're going to be putting the pads on and hitting, and being in even a preseason game, having to be in more stressful situations where you have a greater chance to revert back into old habits just based on your muscle memory and all of that. So J.J. McCarthy has taken enough steps, at least in non-contact practice, to warrant a second look later on. And reports from beat writers that were heralding Kyler Murray as well out ahead of J.J. McCarthy have kind of been, not retracted, but walked back a little bit, especially with Alec Lewis, who said that already J.J. McCarthy made some strides in the few weeks that Minnesota had OTAs and mandatory minicamp, and he had kind of cut into the gap. And if that is the progress that J.J. McCarthy is making, we might have to prepare ourselves for J.J. McCarthy being the starting quarterback if he continues that same trending progress into this now month-long break, into training camp, and into the preseason. It could be J.J. McCarthy. But obviously, progress, as we know, is not linear, and it goes up and down, it ebbs and flows. You hope that overall the graph looks like it is going up and up and up, but on a day in, day out, week in, week out basis, it is not something that is always going to just be one smooth linear line, even if it is an overall positive trend. So I think that this is going to be a real competition for training camp, and I am excited to see it. And I personally still am, in my heart of hearts, rooting for J.J. McCarthy to win this. And I think I kind of touched on it in our last Vibe with the Vikings podcast. But essentially the reason why is because you know what Kyler Murray is. You know that he is a very good quarterback, that when he's at his best is in that 10 to 12 range of NFL quarterbacks. And when at his worst is, around the 18 to 20. So you have, even at his worst, a quarterback that is competent or more competent than whoever at any given point we had leading the offense in the 2025 season. If you are saying that J.J. McCarthy wins that competition, you are necessarily saying that he performed better than that sort of quarterback, which means he's obviously performed better than what he was in 2025, because the 2025 version of J.J. McCarthy was much worse than the overall expansive career of Kyler Murray. But if he wins that competition, he has proven himself, at least in a perfect world you would think that, in the eyes of Kevin O'Connell, that he is better than what we have seen in the, 7-8 year career of the former 2019 first overall pick. And that means that we could be even more excited about this offense, more so than we were when Kyler Murray first signed with the team. I think Murray provides that excellent floor option for if everything does not go right for J.J. McCarthy and he's not able to take the necessary steps, that is who you have, and he is probably the highest probable option for Minnesota because of that, because you're counting on J.J. McCarthy to take significant steps that you're not always sure if he can take, that aren't always a high likelihood of any quarterback really changing into. But right now, Kevin O'Connell and company have seen enough to go into training camp and continue splitting the reps between the guy that a lot of people had already crowned as the starter, who is learning this offense for the first time, who would need as many reps as possible in order to effectively learn this offense for the first time, he is getting his reps split because of a competition with J.J. McCarthy. And if that was a fake competition, that would be an absolutely asinine thing. So I think the only conclusion that we can come to is that it is, in fact, a real competition. And the fact that it's going into training camp shows me that J.J. McCarthy is making some tangible strides into 2026 from the quarterback that he was in 2025. And I think we're seeing that with some of the Alec Lewis reports. I'm not sure if Kevin Seifert has reported along the same lines, but he was the one that said the gap between Murray and McCarthy was the widest at this point. But that is what we have to go off of until we can break down training camp video from iPhones 400 feet away a little bit later on this August. An interesting wrinkle, though, to this quarterback battle, I think, is the news coming from the college ranks that Brendan Sorsby is going to be entering the supplemental NFL draft. And for any of you that need a quick crash course on either who Brendan Sorsby is or what the supplemental draft is, stay tuned right here, and we're going to talk about it. Brendan Sorsby, college quarterback, started his career at Indiana, transferred to Cincinnati, where he was the starter for each of the last 2 seasons, has a big arm, has some accuracy issues, has some trouble still reading a full field defense, and can often get locked into one read, but still has that big play potential and that arm talent potential, albeit probably not as high as like what you got from Anthony Richardson, but he also has a little bit more polish probably at this point than Anthony Richardson did coming out of the draft. Just doesn't have the full set of tools that put Richardson's potential completely out of the stratosphere had he met that potential. But Sorsby has potential. He has more potential than the quarterback that he was at Cincinnati. Now, this past season, or in the transfer portal, he made the decision to leave Cincinnati and go to Texas Tech. So you might be wondering, well, why is he in the supplemental draft? Texas Tech has a successful program. They just made the college football playoff. The main reason that they didn't really have any success in the college football playoff was because they had a pretty bad quarterback in Baron Morton that really couldn't get the job done in any way, shape, or form. And now they do have, assumedly, a guy that could be a first rounder or second rounder in 2027. So why would he walk away from that? Well, he didn't really end up having a choice, because it was found out that while he was with Indiana as a redshirt freshman back in the day, he was betting on games that included Indiana. And that further revealed that he made over 9,000 bets throughout the course of his college career that had totals of up to $100,000, or that went over the $100,000 mark in their totals. When you add them all together, not 9,000 bets of all $100,000 or more, but the compiled money amount from the bets being $100,000, and a lot of those bets being placed on Indiana to win when he was on Indiana, or Cincinnati to win. And we don't even know actually if it was them to win. We just know that the NCAA isn't going to say that. They're not going to come out and say that, oh yeah, no, he bet on himself to throw the game. He bet on Cincinnati to lose, because then that really puts them liable for, some other legal action, probably from gambling companies and class action and all of that, if they were to admit that. So they're not going to come out and say that. So we don't know for sure if he did or did not bet on his own team to lose and bet on himself to throw games, or do the thing where you bet on yourself to throw an interception that a lot of, Emmanuel Clase with the Cleveland Guardians got in trouble for, where the first pitch is going to be outside of the zone. It's going to be a ball on the prop bets and all of that. We just have to take the word of the NCAA and the reporters who have investigated this a little bit more deeply, that all of the bets that were made on his team. Not that that matters in the grand scheme of the NCAA. The NCAA found this out, obviously. The NCAA wanted to suspend him, obviously, or just get him out of football forever, ban him from college football forever, as you would do for anyone in any other sport. And Sorsby said that he was planning to look at all of his options. He went into a 30-day outpatient rehab program for a gambling addiction. which is very real, and then came out and decided that no, he was going to fight this. He was going to hire a lawyer. He was going to sue the NCAA and say that, try to get an injunction and say that, no, I need to be able to play. And eventually found a judge that was, coincidentally from Lubbock, Texas, which is where Texas Tech is, but said that he didn't have much bias because he was actually a Texas Longhorns fan. Whatever you want to think about that, go ahead and think. But whatever the case may be, he said, no, the NCAA can only suspend you for 2 games. You are allowed to play because otherwise it would be detrimental to your mental health, which is, as an aside, just kind of a strange, idiotic argument. What if my mental health, me as a 32-year-old bald podcaster, my mental health would be significantly helped if I made $4.5 million as the starting quarterback for Texas Tech. So I also should be forced to play. You need to give me reps, Texas Tech. I need to be the starter this year. My mental health relies on it. You could make that argument, I guess, for a lot of other people. But, that is what the judge ruled, and it opened the door for Brendan Sorsby to play for Texas Tech. So still, now you're asking yourself, then why is he available in the supplemental draft? That is because all of the other schools in the NCAA, all of the schools in the Big 12 began to rally against and ask for sanctions against Texas Tech. And some athletic directors even going so far as reaching out internally through emails to every single one of their head coaches of any sport and saying, do not schedule anything with Texas Tech for the foreseeable future. If you have anything scheduled, if you're working on a plan to schedule with Texas Tech, we can help you get out of that, but we are not doing anything with Texas Tech because they are willingly letting Brendan Sorsby, a guy that gambled and that probably should be banned from the NCAA for life, they are letting him play next season. And then because of that, Texas Tech threatened legal action, and then the Big 12 was able to put an injunction on any legal action that would prevent the Big 12 from enforcing its bylaws and enforcing its sanctions. So they were going to get that, and it would essentially be, okay, Texas Tech is not allowed to play in the Big 12 championship game if Brendan Sorsby is on the roster per our bylaws. So now it becomes a completely useless thing to have Brendan Sorsby on your roster, because even if he does get you to, 11-1, then you're still not going to be able to clinch an automatic spot because you're not even going to be able to play for the Big 12 championship. So that is when Sorsby ultimately made the call to put all of this behind him and go to the supplemental draft. Supplemental draft. Now we will do a brief refresher on that. I was a little bit more less brief than I wanted to be on the Brendan Sorsby story up to this point, but just wanted to fill in anyone that had not been aware of the Sorsby narrative so far. The supplemental draft is a draft that can or cannot take place, may or may not take place, depending on if there are any prospects that have registered for it, in July for folks that, for whatever reason, had planned to go and stay in college by the time the NFL draft had rolled around, that didn't declare for the NFL draft proper, but for whatever reason now are not able to play in college and fulfill their eligibility. They have this option, the second chance to get into the NFL within the same year that they would have if they had just declared for the draft, by going through this supplemental draft process. Terrell Pryor was one of these guys. Chris Carter was one of these guys. Bernie Kosar purposefully avoided the Minnesota Vikings, who had traded up for him well ahead of time. He saw that and decided, oh yeah, I'm going to go back to college, and then was like, oh, I don't want to go to the Vikings. I want to go to the Browns. Who has ever said that? Only Bernie Kosar, but that is why he got into the supplemental draft, so that he could specifically avoid the Vikings. Now the Vikings got Chris Dolman out of all of that, so they get a Hall of Fame edge rusher. Bygones be bygones. Bernie Kosar wasn't that great of a quarterback anyway. I would much rather have had the Hall of Fame edge rusher in Chris Dolman. So it ended up working out for Minnesota, but Bernie Kosar was one of those guys. Jalen Thompson, the safety from Dallas, that played for Arizona this past couple of seasons, was one of those guys. There are a couple of guys every single year that might be in it, and a lot of teams might just pass on it. And the reason a team would pass on it is because you are bidding, essentially, your draft pick for next year, whatever draft pick it is that you have. And they determine the order of what these draft picks would be if two teams bid a first round draft pick for Brendan Sorsby, for instance, and one of them was a playoff team and one of them was a team that won less than 6 games. The team that won less than 6 games would get the priority because they break it into 3 different tiers. You have any team that won less than 6 games during the previous season. Those guys have the higher draft picks, and within that, they are actually, it doesn't go strictly by their record from last year like the NFL draft would, but it's a random order within that tier. So part of it is the luck of the draw. If you and another team from your tier both bid a second round pick, and those are both the highest bids, and one team is just randomly selected to be higher than you, that is the team that gets him. So it's part luck of the draw, part trying to find a good balance. The other tiers are teams that didn't make the playoffs but won more than 6 games. And then the third tier, last dibs in each round, is the teams that made the playoffs. So these teams do a blind bid of here's what we are willing to give up for this. And whatever is the highest compensation gets that. And if there's any ties, they go to the tier tiebreaker. And if there are any tiebreakers within the tier, it is randomly selected in whatever random order was decided upon by the NFL ahead of time. So Brendan Sorsby could cost a team a first-round pick in 2027 if there is enough, clamor for that. If there is enough demand for that by other teams, or if other teams, or if one particular team is scared that that demand is there, even if it is actually not there, and feels the need to give up one of their first-round picks, like say the New York Jets, who have 3 first-round picks, they could do that. So all of that to say, this could be an option for the Minnesota Vikings. I think if I am Brendan Sorsby, I heard Albert Breer say that it looks like Sorsby is going to go for a second-round pick. I don't want to touch that if I'm the Minnesota Vikings, but I do wonder if Nolan Teasley, trying to build this team in his image, and maybe Kevin O'Connell isn't, high on J.J. McCarthy. Maybe it is just a sham competition, and he still wants there to be a project quarterback behind Kyler Murray, but knows that if Kyler Murray wins the competition, it's going to really piss JJ off, and he's not going to learn. He's not going to want to. It's going to, really kind of drive him against the team no matter what. And maybe McCarthy has an attitude problem. If that's the case, then you can trade JJ McCarthy and then bring in Brendan Sorsby. That is an option, and hope that either Kyler Murray has a really good year or Brendan Sorsby is able to learn a lot behind him. If the cost for that is a second-round pick, I have no interest. I really have no interest in Brendan Sorsby in either case. I would have, if he had been in this last draft, I had a 3rd or 4th round grade on him overall, and then the rule typically is in the supplemental go a round later than you would have had him in the NFL draft, so then 4th or 5th. So maybe, I guess, but that would have to be an instance where we have exhausted all options with J.J. McCarthy, and I think that would be a bad idea because I think there's still a lot of potential in J.J. McCarthy, and I think there's a lot more potential in J.J. McCarthy than there is in Brendan Sorsby, and I think a lot of the faults that Brendan Sorsby has are also had by J.J. McCarthy. But I just wanted to bring that up as an option. You can decide whether or not you would like Brendan Sorsby in purple. If you would like the Vikings to give up a 2nd round, 3rd round, 4th round, 5th round pick in next year's draft in order to bring in Brendan Sorsby and then put the McCarthy era firmly in the past. Let us know in the comments below. But right now, it is a neck-and-neck training camp battle between Kyler Murray and J.J. McCarthy. May the best man win as we head into training camp. And training camp is going to get started here in August. The Vikings released their training camp dates that are going to be open to the public, and there are going to be 13 of those dates, starting on August 1st, which is the get back together weekend across the NFL. You're going to be able to go watch the Vikings practice. There is the night practice that is going to be on August 9th, and then August 19th and 20th, both of the joint practices against the Baltimore Ravens are going to be open to the public. Tickets are $10 for adults, $5 for kids, and I believe there's a senior discount as well. You can go ahead and check out the Vikings team website for more directions on how to get those tickets as training camp comes up in the near future. But there are going to be 13 days open to the public. Please bring your cameras. I'm in Arizona. I can't go to the Vikings training camp, and I need to break down as much J.J. McCarthy, Kyler Murray quarterback battle film. So if you are listening to this, please go every single day, film every single snap that both of those guys take, so that we can all just pour over this film throughout the entire month of August as we wait for the start of the regular season. And we can then, obviously, the experts we are, come to the conclusion that we are right, and whatever, if Kevin O'Connell comes to a different conclusion, he is wrong and deserves to be fired, because we are the experts and he is not. That is why I need those videos, obviously. All right, last piece from tonight. That is all of the news from the last week for your Minnesota Vikings. They also got a couple of guys on waivers today, but right now, what I want to do is a little quick experiment. This Vikings team still has holes to fill in its roster. And on June 1st, there was some more cap room that became available to the Minnesota Vikings. And it's kind of like, getting your tax return, what are you going to spend it on? Because right now, the Minnesota Vikings, after signing, I think all of their draft picks, maybe Jake Golday hasn't been signed just yet, but all of their draft picks still have $13 million in cap. And yes, you could let that roll over into next year, but we're not necessarily going to be hurting for cap room next year. We have a lot of it on the books. And there are extensions, but I think extensions more often than not lower the cap hit in the first year of them because of all of the signing bonus money that can be immediately given to the player, but also immediately spread out through the life of the full contract and any void years that you add on to it that can lessen that can give us even more cap room for the 2026 season. But let's just say it is this $13 million from here until September, no matter what else we do. Any extensions with Brian O'Neill, it doesn't affect their cap number. Any extensions with Jordan Addison, it doesn't affect their cap number. If that is the case and we have $13 million, what do we do with it? And we're not going to save it. We're going to, in this experiment, we don't want to have a surplus so that we don't, get the same amount of money next year. If you're a fan of The Office, you might remember that Oscar explains a budget surplus to Michael like he is 5 by saying, well, if it only costs you $7, if mom and dad give you $10 to run a lemonade stand, and it only costs you $7, next year when you ask to run a lemonade stand, you're only going to get $7, so you have to spend that extra $3 so that you still get $10 next year. You have to spend that extra $3. Here we have to spend that extra $13 million. And here are the players that I want. I think we're good wide receiver. We're obviously have a full quarterback room as well. But, Juwan Jennings, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, that is a full receiver room. The running back room is crowded. Aaron Jones, Xavier Scott, Jordan Mason. I think based on the options that we still have out there, we are, unless we want to bring Cam Akers in, we are in a good place with our running back room, or at least as good of a place as I think we could be in if we were to pit those guys up against any of the free agents that are still available in a running back field. Really, I think the whole offensive side of the ball, I am fine with not upgrading. But I do want to upgrade 2 specific positions, and those are edge, and that is safety. And one of these is not actually an upgrade. It is Harrison Smith coming out of retirement, and the market value for him based on overthecap.com, they say he is worth a 1-year, $2.5 million contract. I don't know necessarily that Harrison Smith would be willing to forego retirement for $2.5 million, but let's just, for the sake of this, because I don't want to make up some fantasy number for all of these that I have no way of researching to see if it is correct or accurate, let's go with what Over the Cap has for the market value of these players, just because they at least have come to that number by going back and comparing players' values on the field to what they end up making in free agent contracts. And they have a concrete way of doing that, and they have a formula for all of that, and it comes out with a number. Maybe it's flawed, maybe it's not, but at least it gives us one strict guideline to follow for this exercise. So Harrison Smith, we bring back $2.5 million. Jay Ward, Theo Jackson, don't love the idea of that being the starting safety room. Harrison Smith, continues to get a step slow, continues to be a more tired tackler each and every year, but still seems to know where to be at the right time, and can still, that intelligence that you have can help continue to teach both Theo Jackson and Jay Ward. I want not only Harrison Smith as a safety, but I want Jabril Peppers. And Jabril Peppers was a guy coming out of Michigan long ago. I think he's like 32, 33 right now. But he was a guy that was so versatile. He played a ton of different positions. He was essentially the prototype for what you see for the big nickel today, for Nick Emanwari. He was athletic. He was big. He would play and line up in the slot. He would line up in as a free safety, as a strong safety, as an edge rusher at times, as a linebacker. He would go all over the field when he was at Michigan, and he has kind of done that a little bit more in the NFL, maybe not as much as of late, and he had limited snaps with the Pittsburgh Steelers last year, but I watched some of his film because I wanted to see if this is a guy that would be worth bringing in, and I specifically watched him as a free safety because he took a lot more snaps at free safety than he has, I think, at any other point of his career. Not more total snaps, but a larger percentage of his snaps at free safety. And he did a great job clicking and closing, better than I would expect for a guy his age, and also having that same headiness that Harrison Smith does in a similar sort of match coverage concept defense. Now, a lot of times he was poaching routes coming from the opposite side as the free safety, but he had great communication with all of the defensive backs. He was able to make tackles. He was able to read where the ball was coming a click faster than everybody else. And I think he, at this stage of his career, is a better tackler than Harrison Smith. So I would like to bring in both Harrison Smith and Jabril Peppers and really diversify the safety room, give Brian Flores a lot of options, combining those guys with Theo Jackson and Jay Ward. And obviously Josh Metellus is going to be on the field all the time. You combine all of that together to have a very versatile safety group where guys have very defined roles and usages based on down and distance and other game situation type of deals. And it also helps, at least for me, that Jabril Peppers a lot of the times was lined up on the same side as James Pierre, and the communication between those two and passing off receivers, if need be, was always pretty good. And if we can have that same sort of continuity with James Pierre, who's going to be a starting quarterback on the outside for Minnesota this year, if he can have a guy that he communicates well with already, and we've already seen that proven in Jabril Peppers, I would love to have that sort of player brought in. So those are the two upgrades at safety I want to make. Jabril Peppers, who his market value came in at the league minimum, $1.5 million per year, probably because of his minimum snap count last year. And the fact that he is getting older, but he was productive when he was out on the field. Don't let that number fool you. And then I have chosen two edge rushers to bring in and kind of, as you would say, replace Jonathan Grenard in the conglomerate, or in the aggregate, if we're going to continue with our Moneyball references from earlier. We're going to replace Jason Giambi in the aggregate, is what they say. We are going to replace Jonathan Grenard in the aggregate. Dallas Turner already off to a good start with his athleticism, lack of variety within his pass rushing moves, but is good in coverage, is good against the run because of his long arms. He can really stack and shed very, very easily. But I want guys as well that can spell Turner or Van Ginkel, or give them other roles, or be on the field at the same time as these guys to confuse the defense so much so, not confuse the defense, but to make them question a lot of where the pressure is coming from, and having a lot of different guys where you could say, yes, this is a viable option of pressure, and this is somebody that we have to be worried about. But it's also somebody we have to be worried about if we're running the ball. And it's also somebody we have to be worried about if they were to drop into zone coverage in the short curl area. And Dallas Turner and Andrew Van Ginkel already have that. But if you can also combine them with Kyle Van Noy at $3.5 million and Jadeveon Clowney at $5.5 million, obviously not all four of those guys on the field at the same time all the time, but maybe in some instances, I think that is going to give you and going to give Brian Flores, who, by the way, had Kyle Van Noy when he was with the Patriots, and he might have had Jabril Peppers when he was with the Patriots. I have to go back and look at that too. But had Kyle Van Noy, liked Kyle Van Noy, and Kyle Van Noy, despite being 35, is still great at out-leveraging tackles, and even at sometimes using speed to power against offensive tackles, and gets a good first step to get into the backfield, kind of like we see from Jalen Redmond with those slant steps to stop the run. And he can also pass rush from a 3 technique. He can pass rush from the outside. He can drop back into coverage. So you can use him in a variety of different situations. If you want to rush the passer and have a NASCAR package out there on, on 3rd down and 7, you can put him inside at the 3 technique or the 4-eye technique, have him as a down lineman, still have Van Ginkel and Dallas Turner as your outside edge rushers if you're running a bare front. And you can even pop him back out. You can even confuse the defense by having him zone blitz and come out, or he can effectively rush the passer from that 3 technique or from that 4-eye technique. So I like Kyle Van Noy because of the versatility that he has. And even though his pressure rate was still only at like 9-10% last year, he looked good against the run. He looked good when he had to drop back into pass coverage, and he looked good when he was rushing the passer when I watched him on film. And he just does a great job of getting under some of the pads of these bigger offensive linemen and really just out leveraging them to the point of attack. Kyle Van Noy, I would love to have that on the team, if not just to, have an effective guy behind Van Ginkel and Dallas Turner. That is not Bo Richter. And then another guy, like I mentioned, was Jadeveon Clowney, the former first overall pick of the 2014 draft by the Houston Texans. He has bounced around and has kind of been a mercenary year in, year out. He's on one new team a year. He was with Dallas last year, and he still has it as an edge rusher. He still has it against the run, and I'm not sure why he's not getting as many offers and why he's still a free agent as we get closer and closer to the 2026 season, because his speed to power is relentless. He still explodes off the snap, and he does it not from a upright edge position. You can have him be a consistent down lineman for you on a lot of your sets, on a lot of your defensive formations, and a lot of your personnel groupings, because he can hold the edge so well against big tackles and guards from perhaps a 4-eye technique, or if you want to put him as a down lineman on a 5 technique just outside of the tackle's outside shoulder, you can do that as well and still have now maybe your upright edge rusher coming from a wide 9 position. Or you can move him inside a little bit more, and he's going to win off the snap more often than not. And he still has explosiveness in his drive off the snap, even when he's not from a upright standing position, even when he's in a 4-point stance down at the line of scrimmage. Watch some of the film. His pressure rate backs it up. It was up near 20%. And if you can get Jadeveon Clowney, Kyle Van Noy, Andrew Van Ginkel, and Dallas Turner as, edge rushers, have 2 of those guys no matter what out there at all times, and sometimes have 3 of them, and sometimes even have 4 of them, I think you are creating a pass rushing plan that can become even more effective than it was when Brian Flores found out he could just spam the Eric Wilson, Blake Cashman twist up the middle all of last year, and what really set Minnesota's defense apart. I think you can add these guys as a new curveball to the defensive game plan on a week in, week out basis, and it also just gives you depth at the edge rusher positions if you still want to keep things the way you are, but just bring in these guys whenever both Turner and Van Ginkel get tired, or if Turner or Van Ginkel get injured. So once again, the 4 guys that we are going to be spending our $13 million of extra cap space on here at the Vibe of the Vikings is edge rusher Kyle Van Noy, 1 year, $3.5 million cap hit. Harrison Smith, the safety, comes back for $2.5 million. Jabril Peppers, the safety from Pittsburgh most recently, comes to Minnesota for $1.5 million. And then Jadeveon Clowney makes the move from Dallas on to what is probably like his sixth team in as many years and comes to the Minnesota Vikings on a $5.5 million cap hit sort of contract. Are there any other remaining free agents that you'd like to see? Do you agree that we need upgrades at the safety and edge positions? What positions would you rather see upgraded? Let us know in the comments below here on the Vibe of the Vikings, and we will try to get to that in our next show, which will be back here on next Wednesday. Thank you for joining us on the latest installment of Vibe of the Vikings. I'm your host, Josh Kolojeski. Go catch the vibe, and don't forget, Skol.